Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And before we hop into our interview with Ben Sidders, I just wanted to play a quick message from our sponsor.
Are you a life science investor or executive looking to make meaningful connections? Introducing Bullpen, an exclusive club where industry leaders gather to help others succeed. Our mantra is simple: find someone to help. Repeat. Join us for virtual panels, networking events, and unparalleled opportunities to collaborate with top-tier professionals. Bullpen, where deal makers meet and innovation thrives. Apply now at bullpen.ventures.
In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Dr. Ben Sidders. Ben is the new Chief Science Officer at Biorelate. He's been working on the forefront of pharma and data science for the past 2 decades, formerly Executive Director and Head of Early Data Science with Oncology R&D at AstraZeneca. With that, welcome, Ben. It's great to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Don. It's really great to be part of your podcast.
Yeah, it's great. Can you just start by just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, but also sort of what's the journey that led you to life sciences? We were talking, beforehand, kind of the broad, categories of life sciences. And in my mind, picking a place to go in life sciences is one of those things that is always just an interesting part of your journey.
Absolutely. So I think growing up, I had, my mother was a nurse and my father was a very practical man. And I think the combination of those two influenced me to think about doing something very proactive in healthcare. And, as I went through my education and then into university, I think I developed this sort of fascination with infectious disease, actually. So quite a different place to where I am now. But there is a thread, and that led me to doing a PhD in tuberculosis. And really, I was studying the host response to infection. And I had an incredible supervisor who was very translationally oriented, and he was very keen that we put together, in this case, a diagnostic, and we patented it. We successfully licensed that patent. And I think that really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that research could have a really tangible impact in the healthcare industry. And so I decided from then in that I wanted to stay in industry rather than academia. And I joined Pfizer back in the early 2000s. Can't remember now, quite a long time ago. And really the rest is history, actually, in terms of my then now my trajectory within the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, and I mean, you said that you were at Berkeley as well, and I mean, so you studied kind of around the world as well. I mean, just tell us a little bit more about sort of your educational path as well.
So I did an undergraduate in molecular biology, and really at that point, kind of bioinformatics wasn't such a thing. But through my experience at Berkeley, so at Berkeley I worked in the School of Public Health with Lee Riley, who was very much focused on infectious disease for public health. So he'd actually discovered E. coli at the CDC, and then was then working in tuberculosis as well. So again, it was still on this theme of studying TB, thinking about the host response. And again, sort of really just opened my eyes to the different ways you could work within the life science industry. And then, when I came back to the UK, so interestingly, Pfizer was actually based very close to where I grew up in the UK, had a big research site. So it was kind of a very easy transition to sort of move back and then slide into a role there.
Yeah. It's, I mean, always interesting to, sort of hear people's journey, especially when it leads you outside of your country. I mean, certainly I feel like, there's a lot of great reasons to just get a good global perspective inside of life sciences as well, just to really understand exactly, how the world works in
For sure.
in both research as well as, in business as well. So whenever I look at your overall resume, you've looked at you've held key roles at major companies like AstraZeneca and Pfizer. So, what have been some of the pivotal moments or experiences in your career that have shaped your approach to drug discovery and data science?
Well, I think at Pfizer, I really learned the ropes of drug discovery. I think when you come from academia or from outside the industry, you have an idea of what it's all about. And generally, I think from the outside world, often target discovery is drug discovery, and really, there's so much more that goes on. And I had the pleasure of working with some absolutely fantastic people who were really at the forefront of bioinformatics or informatics in drug discovery back then. Perhaps I didn't quite articulate, but I'd sort of slid into a more data-driven way during my PhD when I was actually starting to bring together lots of different data sets. And so really, by the end of my PhD, I was completely a dry lab specialist. And then I took that forward at Pfizer, and finding the synergy between the drug discovery problems and the toolkit that I had was really what excited me. And so I worked there through various therapeutic areas. I started off in antivirals, really following the infectious disease theme. And the first drug I worked on was Maraviroc, which was the CCR5 cell surface receptor inhibitor for HIV. And that was a really tremendous experience. Really opened my eyes to the whole kind of clinical development paradigm as well as early research. But also, whilst there, I think I kind of got heavily involved in looking at biological networks. How you could use big data sets and represent them within the kind of protein interaction and connectivity maps within the cells to really start to understand what drove disease and how we could intervene. And back then we pioneered some work along with a fantastic data scientist called Daniel Zemek, called causal reasoning, which was really a method that would help us understand what drove disease if you had these big omics data sets. And looking back on that now, we would call that a knowledge graph. And so this is one of the latest kind of buzzwords and, if you like, advances in the data science and AI field. But actually, back then we didn't really have a name for it. But it kind of really set me on a path which has kind of led me to Biorelate now. But obviously, between then and now, after a decade at Pfizer, I joined AstraZeneca. And really that was driven because after the antivirals, I'd been through various sort of human-centric therapeutic areas, including neuroscience, but really wanted to work in oncology. So this gave me an opportunity to move into cancer. And I was really attracted by AstraZeneca's science-first culture, which was tremendous, is still tremendous, and really, I really thrived in that. But also, oncology is quite special from a data science perspective because the amount of data that is available far outstrips most other places. So you can really do some cool things. And I had so much fun working on a whole load of really cool projects. But AstraZeneca kind of rolled from success to success. So actually my major sort of learning through my AZ time was really a growth in my leadership and management skills. So I scaled the oncology data science function. When I joined, we were less than 10 people. And then when I left, we were in the hundreds. And, not only did we build out that sort of portfolio bioinformatics piece that really drove data science into the portfolio, we also built and created the computational biology and also the data science and AI functions. And so together, there's now a tremendous capability there for doing data science in drug discovery. And the impact, I think, has been huge. Every single project is touched by that team now. But I'm particularly proud of also having created the AstraZeneca, or helped to create the AstraZeneca internal knowledge graph platform. And again, you'll see the thread, but this really, helped or impacted a lot of the new target discovery work, a lot of the functional genomics work that's done within the oncology company. And, I think is for me personally, is part of that trajectory of where we started 15 years ago at Pfizer, thinking about connections, knowledge graphs, networks, to right up to the cutting or current edge of technology.
It's important to have that level of forethought as well. I would imagine that that there are ties all the way through. But I guess if you were to take a look at kind of the places where bioinformatics and AI touch along the complete drug discovery pathway, how does it tie? And you know, tell me a little bit more about the ways that companies are leveraging it. You don't have to go into specifics about AstraZeneca, but just I think it would be helpful for me and the audience to hear a little bit more about how these technologies are being used.
Sure. So, um, I think there is potential for really wide application, broad application of data science and AI in the industry. I think there has been an expectation or a hype that it was going to solve all of the industry's problems, productivity, speed, cost, novelty, etc., all in one sort of big bang, if you like. I think that's really not been the case. And to be honest, those expectations were wildly unrealistic. There are, however, a number of really successful point solutions, if you like, so specific places in the pipeline where data science and AI are making a really tangible impact. And so, kind of thinking sort of, from target discovery onwards, I've mentioned knowledge graphs a few times, but I think they're been to date the most successful application of data science methodology to early research. So really helping us to integrate massive data sets into a structure that you can query very readily and then use to make better informed target selection decisions. Then if we go further forward, chemistry and the design of small molecules has been a real pioneer of the application of data science methods to both design potential new small molecules, test their potential binding properties, and also design the synthetic routes for their synthesis. So I think there's been a huge amount of work in chemistry that's really pioneered and led the way. And then we go on, right? And now the real world evidence is having a massive impact in clinical trials, and so on. So I think there's huge. There is huge excitement. I think it's right that we're excited about it. I think it's important, though, that we see the full impact of AI as the sum of those point solutions, not as it's just going to magically change everything in one fell swoop. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just look at, I mean, I've been in the room several times with the data scientists, whenever we have kind of a key problem on the diagnostic side, and it just amazes me sort of the level of ability that they have to sort of say, hey, look, this stuff is all noise. We're going to remove that from the picture and take a look at the data, without all the noise. We're going to, and of course they lose things that, that then they wanted to keep, and then they continue to modify and things like that. And I just look at, I think about the future of that, where you could put a brilliant brain that could work through those things, but you could also have AI kind of working through some of the early stuff to just say, hey, look, here's the target that we're looking for. And let's try and get rid of the things that are not valuable in this picture, but keep the things that are much more valuable as well. And just from the data science side, I think it'd be even more accelerating and more energizing to be in the room to watch that happen. So yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah, I think you sort of hit on a really interesting point, which maybe we'll come back to later as well. But the way that we integrate the data science into the culture, the way of working within a pharma company is critical, and having the data science fully paired and fully integrated is critical, but very hard to achieve. And it really doesn't work if you have a bunch of data scientists working in isolation and they come up with some hypothesis and then they chuck it over the fence at a lab team, because the lab team sit there and go, well, actually, I've just read this Nature paper that told me about this really great diagnostic target, or whatever. Why should I follow up with this random data scientist who's just come up with something crazy and I don't really understand, versus what was laid out nicely for me in this paper? So there is a real need to have these systems fully inbuilt, and an understanding almost that data science is going to often produce quite different types of hypotheses, and we need to think differently about how we validate them, how we integrate that into our workflows, and then make a decision as to how to go forward with it. And it's a really interesting piece that actually consumed a lot of my time, versus the actual technicalities of data science.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Biorelate. Can you tell us about Biorelate and the company's mission, and what drew you to the role of Chief Science Officer at Biorelate?
This is kind of fun because it's quite a personal story as well in a way. So you remember I said that back at Pfizer we were studying these biological networks in the very early days of sort of informatics and data science. One of the data sets that we were using to create those networks were sort of manually curated protein interaction maps that we would often buy, or there were a few kind of fledgling public sources. But what we realized very early on was those data sources were missing really important information. For example, they had no context. So they might tell you that protein A bound to protein B, but they didn't tell you whether protein A activated or inhibited protein B. It didn't tell you in which cell type or in which disease. So you really had this network of interactions, but you didn't know whether it was even relevant to the thing that you were studying at all. So I began a project with the University of Manchester in the UK, and two incredible PIs there. So to basically develop NLP, natural language processing methods that would replace the manual curation, but also build into it this contextual information that we really wanted. And we had an incredibly successful project. We developed a really nice approach. At Pfizer, we prototyped this within neuroscience, so actually looking at chronic pain. The group here in the UK actually had a phenotypic screen for neuronal excitability. And we were able to show that using our disease-specific network, we doubled the hit rate when we were selecting compounds based on their predicted activity in the network, versus what the scientists on the project teams were choosing. So it was a really, really awesome project. The PhD student that did the work was Daniel Jameson. Daniel Jameson is now the founder and CEO of Biorelate. So he spun out the project after we'd prototyped it there. And that was 10 years ago. I think he started the company. Biorelate had its 10-year anniversary this summer. And he jokes that really he's done all the hard work in those 10 years, and now I'm kind of coming back to the team. But it's tremendous for me because it's rooted in something that I am very passionate about. We built those original prototypes together. I mean, obviously what the company has now is nothing like what we were doing back then. But it's really tremendous to see the progress they've made. And the opportunity now, I think, is the company's at an inflection point. And for me to come in as the CSO, I get to really focus on the scientific strategy and think about how we take that and the company to the next level. And this is really kind of rooted in our desire to accelerate, every decision across the pipeline, not just, those in target discovery. So we're looking to think about how do we bring the tools and technology to the whole of the drug discovery pipeline. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, it's a great lead in actually for my next question, which is, what are some of the exciting, projects or innovations that you're currently working on at Biorelate, and, that you think will have a significant impact on the industry?
Well, I think firstly, one thing that's becoming quite abundantly clear as more and more people build AI approaches into their R&D pipelines is that having structured prior knowledge is really important. So what I mean by that is a pharma company will have its own data sets from its clinical trials, from its translational medicine departments, like that kind of stuff. And they're relatively structured. They still take a fair bit of processing to be usable by machine learning and AI, but they're kind of there, they exist, they're data-based, and we know that they're in common formats, we know how to use them. In contrast, I don't actually know the actual figure, but probably like 95% of our scientific knowledge is wrapped up in the literature. and that's unstructured. So having a way to extract the knowledge that's embedded within those texts, it's not just scientific publications, it's patents, it's grants, it's preprints, it's the works, is really important. And that prior knowledge is really valuable for contextualizing the findings that comes from AI models. So I think, um, you know, again, we weren't doing it for this reason when we started all of this 10 years ago. But it's become increasingly important now to the way that data science functions operate within the life sciences. And so the work that we do now, I think, really allows the data scientists to build better models of disease, to build those knowledge graphs that they can really query and make the most out of. It allows even the biologists to access the data that's hidden in the text much more rapidly and make much better decisions about the experiments they're doing. And that kind of all sort of, comes together for the pipeline in terms of pays off in reduced risk and then greater efficiency of making decisions. And I think that's really important. But technology-wise, we're doing a few things that really interest me, and one of those is actually the advancements with LLMs, so the large language models like ChatGPT we're all aware of, and obviously they provide a ready access to sort of data that is in text. You can ask questions of a whole kind of big corpus of data, and so there is kind of this question as to how does that really relate or play to what Biorelate does. But actually, I think what we found is this incredible benefit. So the natural language processing algorithms that we've traditionally used in this field were really restricted to understanding biological data that was within one sentence, pretty much, maybe across two sentences. But now with the language models that have a much better understanding of how humans write text, they've learned the patterns and speech patterns that we use, they can actually pick up much more sophisticated long-range interactions around the text. And so what actually this means we can do is, we've rebuilt, if you like, our pipeline with the LLMs, and this means we can now extract far more data than we ever could before. Almost to we're sort of jokingly kind of describing this almost like a human level understanding of the text now. But what becomes really important is then how you map that to a common dictionary, an ontology that allows you to then make use of that data within the text. So if you want to go beyond the chat-like interface to the literature, you really need to have this mapping to the dictionary that you care about, and then you can build it into all your models downstream. And this new approach is it's having a massive impact. We're getting back 30% more data than we ever were before with the state-of-the-art NLP. We're finding 4 times as many of these causal interactions, which is what we believe are really important for helping understand mechanism of action of drugs, of targets, you name it. So there's a huge excitement around the technology in this space, and I'm also really excited to see how we can push this into later stages of the pipeline. We're focused very much on almost the molecular understanding of targets and disease, but the same approach could be worked or could be useful in much later stages of the pipeline.
The thing that came to mind to me through that, though, is that I would imagine that scientists throughout the drug development, process as well, have to have tangential questions that they probably don't have time to go answer. And the key question that comes to mind for me is, I would imagine that AI at some point could potentially be the one who's off researching these things while the scientists still can continue to do their work. But hey, look, I ran into this question, and by the way, here's more of an aside question that I'd like to also have answered. And in addition to that, I mean, are you also using the AI as well to help rewrite the questions or rewrite the prompts, I guess? Because I know I often do that even with ChatGPT. I'll say, hey, look, here's what I have in mind. How would you write a better prompt? And then it comes back, and sometimes you still have to adjust or whatever, but then you typically also get to move forward as well. But just curious, if you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, I think where we've where we've had most success with integrating AI, I mean, I think we've always been operating in a field of machine learning anyway,
Yeah.
but we've really taken three prongs to our strategy right now. So the first is to when you query our data set, you can ask, for example, show me the molecular connections between a target and a disease, and it can basically build you the pathways, the connectivity, etc. And that can be sort of a multi-step process, so they can be quite long-range connections. And sometimes it's quite hard to really understand that sort of almost hairball of a network. But actually, it turns out the AI is brilliant at summarizing that for you. So you can then feed that into an AI, and it will then condense it into a much more snappy summarization and pull out the key features. So that's been a really powerful use case. The second is using our graph, our network, to contextualize the LLM. So this is a process known as RAG, or to constrain the queries, I suppose. And so this means actually when you do use our chat interface, you actually get much more relevant results because they're constrained by the graph that we know is very high quality. And you're not, for example, getting random results from Google blogs or something. It is really staying focused on the scientific literature. And then the third process is, I think, is what I've already alluded to in terms of how we use the AI to really extract data from the text in the first place. And all of these things together, make the data much more high quality, make the queries that you can answer much more, I guess, high quality and specific. But they also make it easier. And I think perhaps this is a little bit of what you're alluding to. I think one thing that we find is a lot of biologists use our system. They're not data scientists at all, but they find that they can access the literature in a much more meaningful way and in a much more rapid way using tools like ours than just, going to Google, going to PubMed, whatever. And it really speeds the whole process up.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the rapid growth of data science and pharma, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for the industry?
This is something that's exercised me a lot over the last few years, particularly in senior roles at AZ. But I've kind of come to the conclusion that there are three, maybe four areas that I think we should talk about. We've already touched on culture, so perhaps won't mention that again. But the culture of an organization and how you, from the top down, embed data science into the R&D pipeline is really critical. And it doesn't work to say, I'm going to build a data science group. There's 100 people, change the world. You need everybody to buy into it. You need to have the whole of the R&D process, the discovery leads in particular, buying into what you're doing, and it becomes a collaboration, a proper partnership. But slightly more practically, data is important, critical. And this sounds really obvious perhaps, but a lot of the data that pharma sits on was not generated for AI. It was generated for some other purpose. So it can be really sporadic, a really sparse data set. On one clinical trial, somebody might have done whole exome sequencing. On another trial, they might have done RNA-seq. And then on the third trial, somebody did some random vendor's thing because they were testing out or whatever, right? And when you then try and bring all of this together, even though you think you've got 10,000 patients in lung cancer, for example, you actually have no patients with any commonality of data. And that makes it really hard from a data perspective, data science perspective. So the organizations need to build these data strategies that allow everybody to say, regardless of what the intended use is here and now, we're also building for the future. So every time we generate some data, we're going to make sure it has properties A, B, and C. We can then keep that safe. And at some point, it will pay off. But I think that some point is now. It's the data science teams in these companies are crying out for this data, and that we see now vendors of data with real world cohorts that are increasingly valuable because they provide that kind of structured, complete data set, and it's incredibly valuable. And then the second or third area, perhaps if we started with culture, data, now we're going to is really the models that people are building traditionally, I think a lot of the AI models are very they're predictive or correlative. So they might give you some sort of output that says, we predict this drug will work in this indication or something. But that's actually a very different proposition, and very different to what industry needs, which is we predict this drug's going to work in this indication, and this is why, and this is how you test it. And really, what we're missing in the current models is the causality that allows us to make those inferences of why things are happening. And I mean, super interestingly for me, it's sort of, everything's kind of gone full circle back to where we started, and now we're needing these high quality molecular interaction networks to build out that causality. And I think the next wave of models will be much better at this explainability and incorporate some of this data. So I'm quite excited about that. And then maybe the final piece is sort of somewhat related to the culture, I suppose, but the output from these models, particularly the knowledge graph, it's not quite black or white. It's not the machine doesn't go ping and say this is the target you have to go research. It often comes up with here's 1,000 things ranked from 1 to 1,000, and we as an industry need ways to take those ranked lists forward and triage them in the most efficient way. And so that often doesn't mean a really bespoke target validation package for 1,000 things. It means we need some sort of high throughput approach that's baked in to the whole workflow that says we go from 1,000 down to, 10, and then those 10 go to the teams for target validation or whatever. So there's a slightly different way of thinking about how this stuff is integrated, particularly the validation of the hypothesis that come out of AI models.
Can only imagine the massive amounts of data that are possible, and just the wrangling that teams have to do, to try and say this is what's important. So then my next few questions really focus in on you. And so reflecting on your career, what's been the most valuable piece of leadership advice that you've received?
So I've been inspired by many incredible leaders, I think, and those that always, the advice that I found most effective and the example that I tried to replicate and follow were really those that had deep empathy in their leadership styles. And, I've been trying to bring that to every team that I've led since. So really, trying to create the most motivating and supportive environment that's possible. And one of this might be a bit off piece, but I was heavily influenced by a book that's perhaps a little bit outside of what certainly I like to read a lot of these leadership books and things. But one there was a bit off the wall was called The Captain Class. And this focused really on sports teams. I'm a rugby player. I love sports. So this really spoke to me in the sense of, this great analysis to identify the best performing teams and then what made them different. And, the end of the analysis, I don't think I'm giving it away too much, but, it's really about the captain, the leader of the team, and the properties that make them successful. And it's not the superstar, it's not somebody who's dictating from the top. It's the deeply empathic in the trenches leader that makes a difference with the team. And so that's something that I've always really tried to sort of bring together in my leadership style.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, what inspires you?
People. I love the overlaps, or people who can find and bridge the gap between particularly the data science and some of these more new AI technologies that are coming out of labs and minds that have no understanding of our domain in life sciences. And to find the people who can bridge those two, it's incredible. And then you watch them develop something that's really new and impactful. And of course, at both Pfizer and AZ, I've had the pleasure of hiring and then leading some of just the most incredible talent in this regard. And that's really that inspires me. It does. It makes me excited to see what these people achieve.
Very good. What concerns you?
I think with AI, it's the hype
Mhm.
and the mismatch in the expectations, which we've alluded to. Um, so I think it's gonna come around. The value for AI and data science and drug discovery will be realised and recognised. We just have to ride out the period of disillusionment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on that same point though, right? I mean, I just think through a lot of things in our field, where, people will say, hey, look, this is going to be the next wave of drug, or this is going to be the next wave of, technology, or this. I mean, I feel like there are all of those, and sort of what we always see play out is a long tail that, sort of incorporates, there's a level of adoption that has to happen at some point in time, and then once the adoption happens, then there's, still finding fit inside of the industry, that has to happen as well. And I just feel like there's that, progression that happens naturally almost in every single thing that we have in our space. So I don't see AI as any different. I mean, yes, there's a lot of people that, push and say, hey, look, this is going to be the greatest thing ever, but the reality, is that we are slow to adopt overall as an industry, and we take care to make sure that there's a right fit at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think absolutely, if we think about the transition from small molecules to large molecules, now to cell therapy, it's the same thing every time. And
Yeah.
we'll get there. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
monoclonal antibodies are going to be the next wave, etc. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
and
That's right.
we are there now. It's not like, hey, look, we don't get there. It's a matter of timing. So yeah. Last question: what excites you?
Well, I think this is a great question. I think with some of the advances that we have now, I can go back to a buzzword that we had 10 or 15 years ago, which was systems biology, which also died in a hype cycle because we just did not have the data and we did not have the technology to do it. But now we are really on the cusp, and with the kind of the digital representations that we can make now of cells, of patients, of cohorts of patients, learning from all of this data that we have, we can get to the point where we're actually, we can ask the question that we always wanted to ask is, you know, if I drug this protein, what effect will it have on disease? And if we can do that within an in silico model, and we can come up with a whole load of appropriately qualified results, that can then really guide the future testing, and really we can explore biology in ways we've never done before. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope that I'll be part of that.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. And Ben Sidders, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success podcast and for telling us about Biorelate and your career. I mean, what a fantastic journey. And I wish you all the best in the future as well.
Thank you, Don. It's been great.
Thanks.